In the year 2145, humanity had reached the stars. Their ships roamed the galaxy, exploring strange new worlds and seeking out unknown species. They had made allies with many and enemies with a few. But one thing remained clear: humans were no longer just a species from Earth. They were becoming an important part of the galactic community. Lena Griggs, a biologist from Earth, was one of the many bright minds on the front lines of these new discoveries. She was known for her quick thinking and unwavering dedication to science. But Lena wasn't like most scientists who preferred lab work and quiet research. She loved the field, the unknown. And today, she was heading toward one of the most dangerous and mysterious missions in human history. Her mission was to study an alien species on a far-off planet, known for its unique and valuable biological trait: the milk of their king. This wasn't just any milk. It was said to have incredible healing powers, capable of curing diseases that had plagued humans for centuries. However, it wasn't just the healing properties that made it special. It was the fact that no one had ever dared to collect it. The species they were to study was called the Viewership, a race of towering, powerful aliens whose king was a legendary figure of fear and respect. The Viewership people were known for their strength, and their culture was built around a strict code of honor. Their king, who stood over 10 feet tall, was said to be almost invincible, and his mere presence could silence a room. His milk was believed to be sacred, and no one had ever dared to approach him to collect it. The Viewership were protective of their king, and the few humans who had tried to make contact with the species often found themselves on the receiving end of strange, mysterious forces that they couldn't explain. No one truly understood why the king's milk was so valuable, but its importance couldn't be denied. Lena's mission wasn't just about exploring a new alien world. It was about saving millions of lives on Earth. Her team, though small, was made up of the best minds in biology, chemistry, and medicine. But they all knew that even their skills would not be enough if they didn't gain the trust of the Viewership, and more importantly, the trust of the king. Without it, their mission would be impossible. And without the king's milk, humanity might be doomed to fight a losing battle against diseases they had no cure for. As Lena's ship entered the Viewership's atmosphere, the crew fell silent. The planet was vast, covered in dense forests, rocky mountains, and strange, glowing rivers. The alien world felt like something out of a dream, but it was also real, and it was about to be the site of a dangerous gamble. Lena had read all the reports, studied all the ancient texts, and researched every piece of information she could find about the Viewership. But there was something she didn't fully understand. Why was the king so feared? What made him so powerful? And why was his milk so important? It was all a mystery, and Lena was determined to uncover the truth. The Viewership people had allowed the humans to land on their planet, but only under strict conditions. They were to stay in a small settlement near the planet's edge, far away from the capital city where the king lived. They would be allowed to study the planet's flora and fauna, but the king was off limits. His royal palace was a forbidden place, and none of the Viewership would even speak of it. It was as if the king's domain was sacred, something beyond human understanding. Lena wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. She believed in the power of science and reason. She knew that the milk could hold the key to curing many of humanity's most dangerous diseases, but she also understood the risks involved. The Viewership were not a species that could be easily approached. They were a proud people, and the idea of a human attempting to interact with their king could be seen as an insult. But Lena was determined. She couldn't let fear stop her from doing what was necessary for the future of Earth. And so, with a calm but determined heart, she stood in front of her team, ready to begin the mission. "Remember," Lena said to her crew, "we are here to learn, not to conquer. We must respect their customs and their king. If we can gain their trust, we might just succeed in our mission." The team nodded in agreement, but it was clear that there were concerns in their eyes. The Viewership were not known for their friendliness toward outsiders, especially humans. The risks were high, and there was no guarantee that they would succeed. But Lena was undeterred. She had faced challenges before, and she was ready for this one. As they disembarked from the ship, the alien world greeted them with an eerie silence. The sky above was a swirling mix of purple and orange, and the air felt thick with an energy that Lena couldn't quite explain. The land stretched out before them, wild and untamed, and she felt a sense of awe that only came from standing on the brink of discovery. "Let's go," Lena said, leading the team into the unknown. "We have a king to meet." The team moved forward, their eyes scanning the horizon, unsure of what lay ahead. They knew that their mission was risky, but Lena's courage inspired them to push on. Together, they would face the Varaxi and their legendary king, and hopefully unlock the secrets of a world that had remained hidden for so long. The adventure had begun, and nothing would stop them now. The first few days on the planet were filled with excitement and uncertainty. Lena and her team had landed near the outskirts of the Varaxi kingdom, in a small settlement where the alien people watched them with curious eyes. There were no signs of hostility, but the tension was thick. Every move the humans made was under the watchful eyes of the Varaxi. They were a reserved people, speaking little and observing much. It was clear that the humans' presence was tolerated, but only just. Lena spent most of her time learning about the Varaxi culture. Her research had given her some understanding of their ways, but the truth was much more complex than anything she had read. The Varaxi were not just any alien species. They had a deep connection to their land, their king, and their people. And their king was unlike any ruler Lena had ever encountered in her studies. The Varaxi king was a figure shrouded in mystery. No one had seen him in years. The alien kingdom was said to be ruled with an iron fist, but the king was more than just a ruler. He was a symbol of power, wisdom, and fear. The Varaxi people believed their king was a direct descendant of the gods, a being so powerful that even the thought of challenging him was considered impossible. They had a saying, "The king is as much a force of nature as the sun or the storms." No one dared to question the king, not even his most loyal subjects. His rule was absolute, and his decisions were final. It was said that those who defied him never lived to see another day. His power was not just physical, it was spiritual. The king's presence alone could command respect, and his gaze could make even the bravest of warriors tremble. The Varaxi people would never dare to oppose him, and they considered it a great honor to serve him. But there was more to the king than just fear. Lena learned that the king's position was not merely inherited, it was earned. The king was chosen through a series of trials, a brutal process that tested the strength, wisdom, and spirit of those who aspired to the throne. Only the strongest and most capable were allowed to lead the Varaxi people. The king's role was not just to rule, it was to protect his species from harm, to ensure their survival, and to guide them in times of peace and war. But it was the milk of the king that fascinated Lena the most. The stories told of its miraculous properties, but the Varaxi people spoke of it in whispers. It was sacred, a gift from the gods, and it was believed to have the power to heal even the most deadly of diseases. However, it was also incredibly rare, and no one had ever dared to ask the king for it. The milk was said to be tied to the king's life force, and taking it could drain him of his strength. It was a dangerous act, one that had been attempted only once in the history of the Varaxi people, and the results were disastrous. The story of the last attempt to collect the king's milk was passed down through the generations. The king at the time had been a young, powerful leader, but he had been forced to make a difficult decision. His people were dying from a terrible disease, and the only way to save them was to use the milk. A group of brave souls had approached the king, asking for his milk, believing that it was their only hope. The king, knowing the risks, had agreed, but the process was more than anyone had anticipated. The energy required to extract the milk drained the king's life force, leaving him weakened and vulnerable. The disease spread, and many of those who had hoped for a cure perished. Since then, the Varaxi people had sworn never to ask the king for his milk again. The event had shaken the kingdom to its core. The king's power was not to be taken lightly, and the consequences of draining him were too great. The people had learned to live without it, finding other ways to survive. Lena couldn't help but be captivated by this story. It painted a picture of a ruler who was not just a king but a symbol of sacrifice and power. The more she learned about the Varaxi, the more she understood that their society was built on respect for strength, honor, and loyalty. They revered their king, not out of fear, but because they knew that he was their protector, the one who held their future in his hands. But Lena was determined to find a way to gather the king's milk, not for personal gain, but to save lives. Her mission was clear: to prove that the milk could be collected without harming the king, and to use its power to help those on Earth who were suffering from diseases that science had no cure for. She spent days speaking with the Varaxi people, learning their customs, their fears, and their hopes. But no matter how much she learned, one thing remained a mystery: the king himself. She had not yet seen him, and none of the Varaxi would speak of him in detail. It was as if his presence was too sacred to be discussed. Some of the elders even refused to look her in the eye when she asked about him. Lena knew that her next step was to approach the king directly. But how could she convince him to trust her? How could she gain access to the one being who was both revered and feared by all? And more importantly, how could she ensure that the king's milk would be collected without harming him or his people? There was no easy answer, but Lena was a scientist, and she believed in the power of knowledge. She believed that if she could understand the king's biology, she could find a way to extract his milk safely. And if she could do that, she could change the course of human history. The stakes were high. The king's milk could save millions of lives, but it could also destroy everything if handled improperly. It was a risk Lena was willing to take, but she knew that she had to tread carefully. The future of both the Varaxi and humanity rested on her ability to navigate this delicate mission. As the sun set over the alien world, Lena stood on the edge of the settlement, staring at the distant mountains where the king's palace was said to stand. She could feel the weight of history on her shoulders. The king, the Varaxi, and the future of Earth all depended on what she would do next. But one thing was certain: she was not going to back down. The journey to meet the king had only just begun. The days passed quickly, and Lena's team continued to explore the planet, studying the plants and animals that lived in the strange, vibrant world of the Varaxi. While the scientists worked, Lena couldn't help but think constantly about one thing: the king. The alien ruler, so powerful and feared, remained hidden away in his palace, a place no one could approach. The more Lena learned about the Varaxi, the more she realized how difficult her mission was going to be. The king's people were protective of him, and their culture was built on respect for their leader. Approaching him would be no simple task. But Lena was not one to give up easily. She had spent her life studying biology, working to find cures for diseases that plagued humanity, and this mission was her chance to make a difference. The stakes were high, but Lena believed that if anyone could succeed, it would be her. She needed to find a way to meet the king and convince him to trust her. Only then could she hope to collect his milk without causing harm. One morning, as the sun rose over the alien landscape, Lena gathered her team in the settlement's central area. They sat around a table, discussing the next steps in their mission. The team was made up of experts from various fields, but they all knew that the most critical part of the mission was gaining access to the king. "We've gathered enough data on the flora and fauna here," Lena said, her voice calm but firm. "But it's time for us to move forward. We need to approach the Varaxi king. It's the only way we'll be able to collect the milk we need to save lives on Earth." The others exchanged uneasy glances. The team had been working in the shadows of the king's kingdom for days, but no one had dared approach his palace. Even the thought of it made them uneasy. The Varaxi were a proud species, and their king was the ultimate authority. No one could challenge him without severe consequences. "We can't just ask him for the milk," Lena continued, sensing the hesitation in the air. "The king is a symbol of power and respect. If we approach him the wrong way, it could ruin everything. We need to build trust first. We need to prove that we mean no harm." The team nodded in agreement, but there were still doubts. One of the team members, a scientist named Dr. Thomas, spoke up. "But Lena, what if we fail? The Viraxi have never trusted outsiders, let alone humans. How can we possibly expect them to allow us to collect the milk without risking their anger?" Lena thought for a moment. She had been wondering the same thing. The task before them seemed impossible, but she knew that if they didn't try, they would never have a chance to save those on Earth who were suffering. The diseases were spreading rapidly, and there was no time to waste. "I've been thinking about that," Lena said, her voice steady. "We can't approach the king as outsiders. We need to prove that we understand and respect the Viraxi culture. I think we can gain their trust by showing that we respect their ways. We'll need to meet with the king's advisors first. If we can convince them that we're not here to harm the king, they might allow us to make our case." The idea of meeting with the king's advisors was a risky one. The advisors were powerful figures in the Viraxi kingdom, and they were known to be as fierce and proud as the king himself. But Lena believed that it was the best way to start building a relationship with the king. The advisors would have the king's ear, and if they were convinced of the human sincerity, they could help pave the way for an audience with the king. The team agreed to Lena's plan, and they set out to arrange a meeting with the Viraxi advisors. The process was long and complicated. The Viraxi were not quick to trust, and each step felt like a battle. Lena and her team were carefully watched every time they left their settlement. The Viraxi were always present, observing their every move, but they never spoke to the humans directly. Their silence was both unnerving and respectful. Finally, after several days of waiting, the team received word that the Viraxi advisors had agreed to meet with them. It was a small victory, but it was a start. Lena and a few of the other team members prepared for the meeting, dressing in the proper attire to show respect for the Viraxi culture. They knew that the meeting could be their only chance to persuade the advisors to allow them to approach the king. When the day of the meeting arrived, the team walked into a grand chamber in the heart of the Viraxi settlement. The room was vast, its high ceilings and stone walls giving it an intimidating ancient feel. The advisors were seated at a long table, their faces stern and unreadable. They were tall and imposing, their eyes sharp and piercing. Lena and her team took their seats at the opposite end of the table, trying to project confidence despite the overwhelming pressure. Lena began by speaking calmly, explaining the mission and the importance of the king's milk. She emphasized that their goal was to save lives, not to take anything from the Viraxi people. She spoke about the diseases on Earth and how the king's milk might hold the key to saving millions of humans. The advisors listened in silence, their expressions unchanged. There was no sign of approval or disapproval, but Lena could sense that they were considering her words carefully. She continued, explaining that they understood the Viraxi's culture and would respect the king's wishes. She promised that they would never harm the king, and they only wanted to collect the milk in a way that would not weaken him. It was a tense moment. The Viraxi advisors exchanged looks, their sharp eyes never leaving Lena. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, one of the advisors, a tall and muscular figure with silver markings on his skin, spoke. "Your words are convincing," he said slowly. "But the king is not like others. He will not easily allow you to collect his milk. We must first see that you can prove your worth. If you fail, there will be consequences." Lena nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "We are prepared to prove ourselves," she said firmly. "We will do whatever it takes to gain the king's trust." The advisor looked at her for a long moment before nodding once. "Very well. We will grant you an audience with the king. But know this, you will not be allowed to fail." Lena's heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She had taken the first step toward meeting the king, and she knew that her next move would be the most important one of her life. Lena's heart raced as she and her team were escorted through the grand halls of the Viraxi palace. The walls were made of smooth stone, and the air was thick with the scent of alien flowers that lined the corridors. The palace was unlike anything Lena had ever seen. It was vast and mysterious, a place where every step seemed to echo with history. She couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They were about to meet the legendary Viraxi King, an alien who had the power to change the course of human history with a single decision. The Viraxi advisors had been true to their word, and after careful consideration, they had granted the humans an audience with the king. But the atmosphere was tense. Every member of the team felt the pressure. There was no room for error. If they failed here, there would be no second chances. As they moved through the palace, Lena noticed how the Viraxi soldiers and servants stood still, watching them with silent eyes. The Viraxi were a species built for strength and endurance, and their presence was both impressive and intimidating. No one spoke as the humans were led deeper into the heart of the palace, and the only sound was the soft footsteps echoing in the vast halls. Finally, they reached a large open chamber. The room was circular, with a high ceiling that seemed to stretch toward the stars. In the center of the room stood a raised platform, and on it, seated upon a throne, was the Viraxi King. Lena took a deep breath. The king was even more imposing than she had imagined. He was a towering figure, standing nearly 12 feet tall, his body covered in intricate silver markings that glowed faintly. His eyes, however, were the most striking. They were deep and endless, the color of the midnight sky, and they seemed to see through everything. When he looked at Lena, she felt as though he could see into the very core of her being. The king did not speak at first. He simply sat there, his gaze fixed on the humans, his presence filling the entire room. The Viraxi advisors, who had accompanied Lena and her team, bowed their heads low, showing their respect for their ruler. The humans followed suit, unsure of the proper protocol, but doing their best to show respect. Lena was the first to speak. Her voice was steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "Great king of the Viraxi," she began, "we come not to take from you, but to ask for your help. The diseases that plague our world are growing more deadly by the day. We believe that your milk, your sacred milk, holds the key to saving millions of lives." There was a long pause before the king finally spoke. His voice was deep, resonating with power, yet it carried an almost ancient quality. "Your words are bold, human," the king said. "You stand before me, asking for a gift that no one has dared to ask for in centuries. Do you understand the consequences of your request?" Lena nodded, feeling the weight of the king's words. "Yes, your majesty, we understand the risks. But we also know that the lives of millions are at stake. We would not ask if we did not believe it was the only way to save them." The king's gaze never left Lena as he considered her words. It was as though he was testing her, searching for any hint of dishonesty or desperation. Lena could feel the pressure mounting. She had practiced this speech countless times in her mind, but now, standing before the king, everything felt different. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. After what seemed like an eternity, the king spoke again, his voice softer this time. "Many have come before you, asking for the same thing. They all believed that they could take my milk and use it for their own gain. None of them succeeded. None of them understood the true nature of the gift they sought." Lena's heart sank. "We do not seek it for ourselves, Your Majesty. We seek it to heal, to save our people from death and disease. We ask for your mercy." The king studied her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. He looked to his advisors, who stood in silence, waiting for his decision. Lena could feel the tension in the room, the weight of history pressing down on them all. The Viraxi were a proud people, and their king was not one to be swayed easily. But Lena refused to back down. This was their only chance. "Your request is not one I grant lightly," the king said slowly. "You must prove that you are worthy. You must show me that you understand the true cost of what you ask." Lena nodded. "We are ready, Your Majesty. We will do whatever it takes." The king leaned forward in his throne, his gaze piercing. "Very well," he said. "I will allow you to prove your worth. But know this. If you fail, the consequences will be dire, not just for you, but for your entire species. If you truly understand what it means to take from me, you will not falter. You will do whatever it takes, no matter the cost." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that the king's words were not empty threats. The Viroxi were not a species that tolerated weakness. If they failed, they would not be allowed to leave the palace alive. The king gestured toward his advisors, who stepped forward and placed a small glowing stone in the center of the room. The stone pulsed with a strange, otherworldly energy, and Lena felt its power reverberating through the air. "This stone," the king said, "is a test. If you can activate it, you will have proven that you are worthy of my gift. If not, you will leave this palace empty-handed." Lena's mind raced. What was the stone? How could they activate it? The answer was unclear, but there was no time to waste. She had to try. Stepping forward, Lena reached out and placed her hand on the stone. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through her body. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before, both exhilarating and terrifying. She could feel the energy pulling at her, testing her resolve. The stone began to glow brighter, its light filling the room. Lena focused all of her energy on it, pushing through the overwhelming sensation. She had to succeed. There was no other option. Lena's fingers gripped the glowing stone, her heart pounding in her chest. The strange, pulsing energy surged through her body, filling her with a sense of power and fear. It was as if the stone itself was testing her, pushing her to the very limit of her endurance. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she didn't pull away. There was no time for hesitation. The lives of millions of people on Earth depended on her ability to succeed. Failure was not an option. The room fell silent as Lena focused, her mind racing to understand what was happening. The stone was warm under her hand, its light brightening with each passing second. The king's piercing gaze never wavered, and the advisors watched intently, their expressions unreadable. Lena's breathing slowed as she concentrated. She could feel the power of the stone growing stronger, its energy seeping into her. It was a strange sensation, like nothing she had ever experienced before. It felt as though the very essence of the Viroxi kingdom was connected to it. The stone was not just a test of her physical strength, it was a test of her spirit, her resolve. She closed her eyes for a moment, clearing her mind of all distractions. The task at hand was clear. She had to prove that she was worthy of the king's gift. She had to show him that she understood the responsibility that came with it. Taking the king's milk was not just about saving lives. It was about respecting the power that came with it, the power to heal and to destroy. Lena reached deep within herself, tapping into every ounce of her strength. She could feel the energy of the stone aligning with her own energy, the two forces coming together in perfect harmony. Slowly, she began to understand how it worked. It wasn't about forcing the stone to respond. It was about trusting it, letting the energy flow through her in a natural way. She relaxed, allowing the stone to guide her. As she focused, the stone's light began to change. It shifted from a bright white glow to a soft, pulsing blue. The energy flowing through her became steadier, more controlled. Lena could feel the stone's power responding to her intent, recognizing her determination and her respect for the Viroxi people. The king's voice broke the silence. "Interesting," he said, his deep tone carrying across the room. "You understand the power of the stone, but understanding is only the first step. The true test lies in your ability to use that power wisely." Lena opened her eyes and saw that the stone was now glowing steadily, its light no longer overwhelming. She felt a sense of accomplishment, but she knew that the real challenge had only just begun. The king was watching her closely, waiting to see how she would handle the responsibility that came with the power she had just unlocked. "I understand, Your Majesty," Lena said, her voice steady. "I know that the gift you offer is not one to be taken lightly. I only ask for the chance to prove that I am worthy of it." The king's gaze softened ever so slightly, but his expression remained serious. Your words are clear, human, but it is not enough to speak of worthiness. You must show me that you are ready to bear the weight of this responsibility. He gestured to the stone, which now pulsed with a steady, calm light. You have passed the first test, but now you must face the second. The true challenge is not in understanding the power, but in using it without losing yourself in it. Lena nodded, her heart racing again. The king's words made sense. The Viraxi believed in balance, understanding power and knowing when and how to wield it. If she was going to collect the king's milk, she would need to prove that she could handle such immense responsibility. Proceed, the king said, his voice commanding. Lena took a deep breath and stepped back. The stone still glowed brightly, its power pulsing steadily in the center of the room. It was time to test her own limits, to prove that she could control the force she had just tapped into. She extended her hand once more, but this time, she did not reach out in haste. She moved slowly, with care, allowing her mind to stay calm and her thoughts focused. The energy she had felt earlier was still there, but now it was more familiar. She could sense the stone's intentions, its need to be respected. It wasn't something to be controlled, it was something to be understood and guided. Lena placed her hand back on the stone, this time with a quiet confidence. She could feel the power inside her, the connection between herself and the stone deepening. As she focused, the light of the stone shifted again, but this time, it did not blind her. Instead, it surrounded her like a warm, gentle glow, radiating outward. The room was silent as Lena stood there, her hand on the stone. The Viraxi advisors exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. The king said nothing, but his eyes never left her. It felt as though the entire kingdom was watching her, waiting to see if she would succeed or fail. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Lena stepped back from the stone. The light slowly faded, and the room returned to its normal state. She felt drained, as though she had given a part of herself to the stone. But at the same time, she felt a strange sense of peace. She had done it. She had passed the second test. The king studied her for a long moment, his gaze still intense. The room was completely still, the silence stretching on. You have shown great strength, human, the king said at last. But power alone is not enough. To prove your worth, you must also show me your heart. You must show me that you are not driven by selfish desire or greed, but by a genuine wish to help others. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She knew that this final test would be the hardest of all. She had already proven that she could control the stone's power, but the king wanted to know if she was truly worthy of the responsibility that came with it. He wanted to know if her intentions were pure. I came to your world, your majesty, Lena said, her voice filled with sincerity, not for fame, not for glory, but because there are people on my planet who are suffering. I have seen the pain and the death caused by these diseases. I want to help them. I want to save as many lives as I can, and I believe that your milk can heal them. She looked the king in the eye, her gaze steady. I would not ask for your gift if I did not believe it would make a difference. I only seek to help those in need. The king remained silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with a quiet wisdom. You have shown me your heart, human, he said, and for that, I will grant you what you seek. Lena felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had passed the tests. She had proven herself worthy of the king's trust. Lena felt her breath catch in her chest as the king's words settled around her. He had granted her request. After everything, every test, every challenge, he was allowing her to take what she had come for. The relief that washed over her was almost overwhelming, but she knew the final part of the journey was still ahead. The king had promised his gift, but there was still the question of how it would be given and what would happen next. The king studied her for a moment longer, his eyes still sharp and calculating. Despite his words of approval, Lena could sense the weight of his judgment. The Viroxi were not a species known for kindness. They were a people who respected strength, resolve, and above all, purpose. Lena had passed the tests, but the true measure of her worth would come only when she left the palace and returned to Earth with the gift she had fought so hard to earn. "You have shown your heart, human," the king spoke again, his voice softer but still full of authority. "And that is why I will grant you what you seek. However, there is a condition." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had known there would be a catch, but she had hoped that after everything, this moment would be free of any further demands. "What is the condition, Your Majesty?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden tension that filled the air. The king's gaze deepened. "The gift I offer you is not something that can be taken lightly. You will take my milk, yes, but you must also swear to protect it. It is not just a cure, it is a force, a power that can save, but it can also destroy. If you misuse it, if you allow it to fall into the wrong hands, it will bring more harm than good. This power must be safeguarded, and you must be its guardian." Lena nodded without hesitation. "I understand, Your Majesty. I swear on my life that I will protect it. I will ensure that no one misuses it. I will use it only to heal, never to harm." The king's eyes studied her, as if he could sense the sincerity in her words. For a long moment, there was silence. The Viroxi advisors stood in stillness, watching, waiting. Then the king made a subtle motion with his hand, and a low hum filled the room. "Very well," the king said, his voice carrying a finality that made Lena's pulse race. "You are now ready to receive the gift." A soft, glowing light appeared before the king, swirling in the air like liquid energy. Lena felt a strange pull toward it, a magnetic force that seemed to draw her in. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment she had been fighting for. The king extended his hand, and the light began to take shape, forming into a small, crystalline vial. The vial glowed with a soft, blue light, almost as if it held the essence of the Viroxi world itself. It was beautiful, but it was also intimidating. This small vial held the power to change everything. It could cure the diseases ravaging Earth, but it could also be used in ways Lena could not yet fathom. She reached out and took the vial in her hand. The energy from it was intense, but she could feel its potential, its promise to heal and protect. The power it contained was more than she had ever imagined. She carefully held it, as though it might break if she moved too quickly. The king's voice broke through her thoughts. "The vial will remain charged as long as you uphold your vow. But be warned, the power it contains is not infinite. Use it wisely, and it will last. But if misused, it will diminish quickly. The gift is not just a cure. It is a reflection of the heart of its bearer." Lena nodded, her grip tightening around the vial. She understood. This was not just a physical gift. It was a responsibility. The king's words echoed in her mind, a reflection of the heart of its bearer. She knew she could not let her heart falter. She had to stay true to the mission. She had to protect her people, no matter the cost. The king rose from his throne, towering over her as he spoke once more. "I trust you will honor this gift," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "Go now, and do not return until you have proven that you can wield this power responsibly." Lena's heart was still racing, but she bowed low, as deeply as she could. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I swear that I will not fail you." The king gave a final, calculating look. He turned and waved his hand, signaling the end of the audience. "Go with my blessing. But remember, human, the greatest power is not in what you have, but in how you use it." Lena felt a shiver run down her spine as the Viroxi advisors began to move, guiding her out of the chamber. She glanced back at the king one last time, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like approval in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was enough to give her hope. The moment she stepped outside the throne room, Lena was struck by the weight of what she had just received. The vial in her hand felt heavier than it had before. It was as though the responsibility was settling in. She had been granted the power to heal, to save lives, but it was also a power that could change the course of history. The consequences of her actions were far greater than she had ever imagined. Lena walked down the long hallway, her mind spinning. She had succeeded. She had earned the king's trust. But now the real work would begin. She had the power to change everything, to help those who needed it most. She only hoped that she could live up to the weight of her promise. She exited the palace and looked up at the sky. It was vast and filled with the stars of another world, a world that had shown her a path to salvation. But the path ahead was still uncertain, and Lena knew that the hardest part of the journey was yet to come. Lena stood at the edge of the Viraxi ship, her heart heavy with the weight of what she was carrying. The glowing vial was securely fastened to her belt, a constant reminder of the responsibility she now bore. She had left the Viraxi palace with the king's blessing, but the real challenge had only just begun. She was returning to Earth, to a planet plagued by disease, with the power to change everything. But she knew that with this power came a choice. How would she use it? The journey back to Earth had been long and filled with questions. Lena stared out of the ship's window at the stars, their distant glow a reminder of the vastness of the universe. It was strange to think that such a small vial held so much power, power that could heal or harm, depending on how it was used. Earth needed this cure, but Lena could feel the weight of the king's warning echoing in her mind. The greatest power is not in what you have, but in how you use it. She turned away from the window and looked at the rest of her team. They had been quiet since leaving the Viraxi world, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The mission was over, but the true mission had just begun. They were carrying hope, hope that Earth could be healed, that the millions who suffered could find relief. But Lena knew the truth. Healing would not come easily, and she could not do it alone. "Lena," a voice called softly. She turned to find her friend, Dr. Ethan Clark, standing by the controls. His expression was serious, his brow furrowed in thought. "We're almost there. Are you okay?" Lena nodded, though she felt anything but okay. The journey back had been a time of reflection. She had been given a gift, but it was more than just a cure. It was a responsibility. Ethan had been by her side throughout this entire mission, helping her every step of the way. And now, as they neared Earth, he was the one person she trusted to help her navigate the road ahead. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." Ethan stepped closer. "About the king's warning." Lena met his eyes. "Yes, I feel it too. We have the power to save lives, but we also have the power to destroy. We can't afford to make mistakes." Ethan nodded slowly, his face grim. "We've been handed a gift, but it comes with a cost. And it's not just about saving people. We have to be careful who we trust with this power. There are always people who will try to exploit it." Lena's stomach tightened at the thought. There were always those who would seek to use power for their own gain. The Viraxi king had made it clear that this power could not be taken lightly. If she used it incorrectly, the consequences could be catastrophic. But what choice did she have? The people on Earth were dying. The diseases were spreading faster than any cure could keep up. This small vial was the only hope they had left. "We can't fail," Lena said quietly. "We can't let anyone else misuse this power." Ethan gave her a reassuring look. "We won't. We're in this together." The ship began to descend through Earth's atmosphere, the familiar blue and green of the planet coming into view. Lena felt a mix of relief and fear. They were home. But with the return to Earth came new challenges. The governments of Earth had already shown interest in the power of the Viraxi gift. They would want control, they would want to study it, and they would want to use it in ways that Lena and her team might not agree with. She had made a promise to the Viraxi king to protect the gift, and she intended to keep it. But she would need help. She couldn't do this alone. She had to find allies. people who truly wanted to heal the planet, not just profit from it. As the ship touched down on Earth's soil, the team stood together in silence. The door opened, and they stepped out into the familiar surroundings of their home planet. The air was different here, heavier, filled with the scent of the cities, the noise of people rushing by. It was a stark contrast to the quiet of the Varaxi world, but it was home. Lena's eyes scanned the landscape. She could see the signs of the disease that had ravaged the population. People were suffering. Entire cities had been abandoned. Hospitals were overflowing. The need for the cure was urgent. "Let's get to work," Lena said, her voice steady now. She knew that this would be the most difficult part of the journey. Getting the cure to the people who needed it most would not be simple. There would be obstacles. There would be resistance. But she had made a promise, and she would keep it. The team moved quickly, preparing to distribute the first dose of the Varaxi gift to the medical facilities around the world. It was only a small amount, enough to treat a few hundred people, but it was a start. The vial that Lena carried still held the power to heal, but she had to use it wisely. There would be more doses, but each one had to be carefully measured, carefully guarded. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The diseases were spreading faster than anyone had anticipated. If they didn't act quickly, they might lose their chance to make a difference. As the first patient was treated with the Varaxi gift, Lena watched with bated breath. The effects were almost immediate. The signs of illness faded from the patient's face, and their energy returned. It was a miracle. The gift was real. But as the success of the first treatment spread, so did the fear. Governments began to take notice, and the world's attention turned to the Varaxi cure. Some saw it as salvation, while others saw it as a tool for control. There were already whispers of conflict, of those who would try to take the cure by force. Lena knew that this was just the beginning. The real fight had only started. She had the power to save the world, but she also had to protect it from those who would use it for darker purposes. She couldn't let the cure fall into the wrong hands. She looked down at the vial on her belt. The light still glowed softly, a reminder of everything that was at stake. It was up to her to ensure that the power of the Varaxi gift would not be misused. The future of humanity depended on it.